Galactic soldier slapped a woman diplomat. 3 seconds later, she said, "You forgot rule number 2. The dreadnought was called the Inevitable Dominion, and Commander Sarah Reeves had decided, somewhere between the 3rd security checkpoint and the 4th, that whoever named it deserved a refund on their imagination. Inevitable Dominion, she murmured, boots ringing on obsidian decking polished to a funeral shine. Sounds like a metal band from Cleveland, opened for once, never recovered. Her escort, 2 warriors the approximate size and warmth of vending machines, did not respond. They never responded. 12,000 years of conquest had bred a species that considered small talk a symptom of weakness and weakness a capital offense. Their armor was black lacquered chitin veined with gold, their faces gray stone masks carved by something angry, and their empire stretched across 400 systems, 3 of which were populated entirely by species they had chained to mining rigs. Sarah carried a clipboard, a thermos of gas station coffee she'd smuggled past 3 scanners, and a stick of spearmint gum going stale in her cheek. This was, according to the intelligence dossier on humanity, either a calculated insult or a war ritual. They had not ruled out both. The bridge opened around her like a cathedral built by people who grudges. Hollow displays bled cold blue light across ranks of motionless soldiers. Beyond the viewport, the 3rd Fleet hung against the stars, hundreds of blade-shaped hulls, patient as sharks. And at the center of it all, beneath a cape the color of dried blood, stood War-Marshal Hal the Unbroken, Reaver of the Worlds, a creature whose face looked like a cliff that had been personally offended by erosion. "The human sends one envoy," he rumbled. His voice came from somewhere geological. "A single female with a beverage. The beverage is non-negotiable." Sarah settled into the lone chair facing him, deliberately small, deliberately low, a psychological trick older than her species' written language. She crossed her legs and popped her gum. 40 hands twitched toward weapons. "Coffee's the only reason my species discovered fire. We needed something to put it under." 8 years since humanity had stumbled into the Galactic Concord, the awkward new neighbors who exported hot sauce, country music, and an alarming number of lawyers. 8 years of the elder races smiling politely at the primates while quietly filing them under harmless. Sarah had spent 6 of those years making sure that file stayed exactly where it was. "You come to negotiate for the—" Hal descended a step, cape whispering, 12 billion laborers, the property of the Empire. "The word you're looking for is prisoners." Sarah clicked her pen. "But sure, let's talk property, because I've got a list here," she flipped a page, "of 41 documented atrocities, 6 broken armistice terms, and 1 orbital bombardment of a hospital moon that even your allies called, and I'm quoting the ambassador directly, a bit much. They are cowards. They have 11 stomachs and still had trouble digesting that one." She looked up at him, and for a moment something colder moved behind her eyes, a flicker, quickly buried. She thought of the transmission she'd watched 14 months ago, a child's voice asking in careful traded English whether the humans were real, whether anyone was coming. Yes, she'd wanted to tell that child. Yes, we're real. Hang on. 14 months of hearings, vetoes, and diplomatic cowardice later, she was finally, personally, delivering the answer. She popped her gum again. The flicker vanished under vending machine raid cheerfulness. "Here's my review so far, Marshal. 2 stars. Is great, very evil monastery. But the host keeps threatening genocide, and the coffee situation aboard this ship is a hate crime all its own." A tremor ran through the assembled officers. Not laughter. They didn't have laughter. It was the sound of 40 soldiers realizing their war-marshal was being. They had no word for it. Their language contained 41 terms for dominance and none for sass. "You mock me." Hal's eyes, pale as dead stars, narrowed. "On my own bridge. I'm negotiating. This is what it looks like when my species is being nice." She leaned back. "There's an old human philosopher, Dalton of the Roadhouse School. He taught us, be nice. Be nice until it's time to not be nice." She waited, stone faces, nothing. She sighed at the ceiling, died for nothing. Enough! The word cracked across the bridge like an icefall. You will convey the Empire's terms to your conquered. The remain ours. Your inspection fleets withdraw, and your species will learn the posture appropriate to its size. Sarah set down the clipboard. She stood slowly, unhurried, the way you stand when you've rehearsed a moment for 2 years in front of a mirror. And when she spoke again, the Colorado drawl was gone. What came out instead was high, ritual grammar, the formal tense reserved for challenges between equals, a tense no outsider was supposed to know existed. Then hear the answer of my people, Hal, called unbroken, every syllable placed like a blade on velvet. You chain children in the dark and name it strength. You burn the helpless and name it glory. I have read your saga scrolls, Marshal. I know what your ancestors called warriors who fight only those who cannot fight back. The silence changed texture, became something with edges. They called them carrion eaters, Sarah said, in front of his officers, his soldiers, his ancestors' banners. Tell me, does the unbroken wear his title, or does he scavenge it? The blow came exactly as fast as the dossier said it would. Gauntlet, backhand, full rotation of the hips, Hal had killed enemy champions with less. The impact detonated across Sarah's cheek and snapped her head sideways, and the crack of it echoed off the cathedral ceiling like a gunshot in a church. Her braid whipped loose. The thermos hit the deck and rolled, spilling cheap coffee across sacred obsidian. Blood painted a thin red comma at the corner of her mouth. Nobody breathed. 40 warriors stood frozen between triumph and something that felt, inexplicably, like the floor tilting. Sarah's head stayed turned for one long second. 2. She worked her jaw, ran her tongue across her teeth, all present. Then she straightened, unhurried as sunrise, and spat a bright thread of red onto the obsidian deck, and when she looked up at the War-Marshal of the Empire, she was smiling. Not with anger, not even with pain. With relief. 3 seconds, she said softly to no one, checking a watch that wasn't a watch. 2. You dare smile. 1. Beyond the viewport, the stars tore open. 40 points of light bloomed in perfect formation around the Third Fleet, human cruisers dropping out of FTL simultaneously, weapons already hot, arranged with the casual geometry of a trap that had been waiting there, invisible, all along. Hal's gaze snapped from the viewport to the small, bleeding, still smiling woman on his bridge, and 12,000 years of conquest felt something entirely new crawl up its spine. Sarah picked up her thermos, took a sip, popped her gum. 8 years earlier, in a marble amphitheater on the Concord, humanity had committed the single greatest act of paperwork in galactic history. The memory lived in 1,000 archival feeds. Ambassador of Earth, 5'4" in sensible shoes, wheeling a cart into the admission hearing. On the cart sat humanity's treaty annex, 9,000 pages, bound in blue, dense as a dying star. The elder races had stared at it the way one stares at a casserole brought by a neighbor of uncertain hygiene. A summary is available, had offered pleasantly. But the full document was prepared by a firm in New Jersey, and they're very proud of it. The Concord had 11,000 years of jurisprudence and the collective attention span of a toddler at a fireworks show. They did what every sentient species does when confronted with terms and conditions. They scrolled to the bottom. They signed. Buried on page 4782, in language so dry it could dehydrate a gas giant, sat the envoy sanctity clause. Any signatory power whose officer strikes an accredited envoy forfeits, immediately and irrevocably, all conquered protections of neutrality, territory, and armistice. Not a fine, not a censure. Forfeits. The lawyers in New Jersey had underlined it twice, which in New Jersey is a declaration of love. Humanity had then spent 8 years being charming, harmless, and slightly ridiculous. The species that brought hot sauce to state dinners and taught the ambassador to line dance. And all the while, Every human diplomat carried 3 rules stitched into their training like scripture, drilled in a classroom in Colorado Springs beneath a poster of a sunset and a crane kick. Rule 1. Never throw the first punch. Rule 2. Make absolutely sure they throw it in front of witnesses. Rule 3. Always finish it. Sarah Reeves had graduated first in her class. She had also, according to her file, been cited twice for excessive informality under fire, and once for teaching a hostage-taker to lose at poker, which the review board reluctantly logged as de-escalation. Her instructor, a old Marine-turned-negotiator named, had handed her the certificate and said the words she'd carried onto 40 hostile ships since. Rule 2 has a 100% success rate, Reeves. Mostly because nobody's ever survived long enough to leave a review. Now, aboard the bridge of the inevitable Dominion, in the 4th second after the slap, all 9,000 pages came due at once. To those 3 seconds had been silence. To the machinery of human civilization, they had been an avalanche. Second 1. The censor braid woven into Sarah's collar disguised as embroidery because human tailors were also patriots, transmitted the strike in full spectrum. Impact force, gauntlet serial number, 41 witnesses, Hal's face rendered in resolution sharp enough to count his regrets, of which there were currently none. That would change. Second 2. The transmission hit the Concord's arbitration intelligence, a lawyer the size of a moon that had been waiting 8 years to be interesting. It cross-referenced page 4782, certified the violation, and published the forfeiture to every signatory government simultaneously. Somewhere in the Galactic core, 11 elder ambassadors woke to notifications they did not understand and would shortly find unforgettable. Second 3. The certification reached the human fleet holding position in the dark, 4 light minutes out, running silent for 9 days on cold engines and warm coffee. Aboard the flagship Roadhouse, Admiral looked at the single line of text on her display, violation certified. Condition SWAYZE, and permitted herself one professional smile. All ships, she said, it's time to not be nice. Which is how 40 human cruisers came to materialize around the Third Fleet, in a geometry that naval academies would study for a century. Every firing lane pre-plotted, every escape vector quietly occupied, the whole formation arranged with the courtesy of an ambush that had. On the bridge of the inevitable Dominion, a junior censor officer described it, in the Empire's first recorded act of poetry, as the world's angriest surprise party. Hal stood very still, cape settling around him like the dust after a demolition. War-Marshals of the Empire did not experience confusion. Confusion was for prey. And yet the woman before him, small, bleeding, smiling, refused to fit any shape his 12,000 years of inherited certainty had prepared him for. His hand still tingled from the blow. It was beginning to feel less like victory and more like a signature. "Explain," he said, and hated that the word came out quieter than he intended. "Happy to." Sarah retrieved her thermos from the deck, shook it mournfully empty, and set it on his ceremonial war table like a flag. 8 years ago, your Concord signed our membership treaty. Big blue book, 9,000 pages. You initialed 17 of them personally, Marshal. Page 4782. Legal officer, Hal did not look away from her. The annex. Along the bridge's edge, a narrow in gray robes was already scrolling, talons flickering through holographic text at panic velocity. Faces were carved stone, but A's shoulders were performing an opera. The scrolling slowed, stopped. When he spoke, his voice had the specific hollowness of a lawyer discovering the fine print applies to him. War-Marshal, there is a subclause. There's a whole subfamily of them, Sarah said. But the one that matters says this. The moment your gauntlet touched my face in front of 41 witnesses and your ancestors' banners, the Empire ceased to exist as a protected conquered power. No neutrality, no armistice enforcement, no treaty shield around your 400 systems. She began, unhurried, to remove her earrings left, then right, and slipped them into her pocket with the ceremony of a priest disrobing. Where I'm from, this gesture means diplomacy's over, boys. It's Springer time. That reference is 50 years old and I don't care. Some art is eternal. You provoked me. The words ground out of him like tectonic plates. The challenge grammar, the carrion insult. You built the moment. I negotiated, Sarah said, in your language. First time anyone's bothered, by the way. You're welcome. Her voice stayed light, but her eyes had gone flat and patient, and somewhere behind them sat a child's voice asking if the humans were real. You had 100 chances to answer words with words, Marshal. Every diplomat before me gave you words and you sent them home with ash samples of the worlds you'd burned while they talked. So no, I didn't make you do anything. I just finally asked the question, the way your empire answers questions. I was still reading. His voice cracked across the silence. War-Marshal, the forfeiture is self-executing. There is no appeal body. We wrote the appeal process out of the charter ourselves in the second epoch to deny it to conquered species. The humans cited our own amendment. Someone's armor creaked in the ranks behind him. On a bridge, this counted as a scream. Sarah looked around at them, the frozen honor guard, the officers caught between rage and arithmetic, the banners of 100 conquered worlds hanging overhead like receipts. When she spoke again, it wasn't to Hal. It was to the room. Your empire runs on a single story, she said. That strength is the only law, and everyone under your boot signed up for it by being weaker. Fine. Congratulations. Today the paperwork agrees with you. She touched her cheekbone, already purpling, and smiled through it. You are now exactly as protected as the were. And that landed. She watched it land, watched 40 warriors simultaneously perform the same terrible calculation, the one where they counted the human ships outside, and for the first time in 12,000 years, ran the equation from the other side. Hal's fist closed. Deck plating complained beneath his boots. Behind his fury, though, something older was stirring, not fear, not yet, but its diplomatic advance team. He had struck a soft, small creature, and the galaxy's laws had detonated. It occurred to him, in a slow, geological way, that the softness might have been aimed. This changes nothing, he said. You are one female on my bridge in the heart of my fleet. Funny thing about that. Sarah pulled a fresh stick of spearmint from her sleeve, folded it into her mouth, and popped the gum once, a small green gunshot. Then she tapped the embroidery at her collar, and when she spoke, her voice carried on an open channel to 40 warships full of people who had been waiting 8 years, 4 light minutes and 3 seconds for exactly these words. This is Reeves, she said. He touched the face. I repeat, he touched the face. Outside the viewport, 40 human cruisers lit their engines at once, and somewhere below decks, faint but rising through the hull itself, came a sound no had ever heard before. Electric guitar, ascending closer. The boarding pods hit the inevitable dominion like lawn darts thrown by God. 8 impacts, bow to stern, each one a bell toll through the dreadnought's bones. Damaged klaxons sang their war hymn and then, horribly, were drowned out. Because human breaching pods carried external speakers, and the external speakers carried van. And there is no tactical doctrine in 12,000 years of conquest that covers being invaded by Panama. In Corridor 7 descending, an honor guard formed a ritual phalanx, blades raised in the ancient challenge stance, and waited for the humans to answer the challenge as civilized warriors would. The humans came around the corner like a hockey brawl with a budget. No stances, no declarations. Marines in scuffed gray armor hit the phalanx low, high, and sideways, shoulder-checking 300-pound warriors into bulkheads, fighting with elbows and door frames, and in one documented case, a fire extinguisher named Persuasion in stenciled letters. A blade master executed a ceremonial disarming flourish that had won him 9 duels. A corporal from Milwaukee simply tackled him mid-flourish, and his 8-second incapacitation entered military archives under a new classification the analysts titled After much debate, cheating effective. On the bridge, Hal listened to his ship being digested and understood with a soldier's honesty that he had made an error of scale. "Regroup at the command deck," he thundered. "The female stays with me. She is leverage." "See, that's adorable." Sarah rolled her neck until it cracked. Her cheek had swollen enough to blur her vision on the left, and her voice carried a pleasant, terrifying calm, the tone of a woman who had finally reached the part of the evening she dressed for. "You still think I'm the hostage?" His honor guard moved first, 6 of them the Empire's finest, closing on one small bruised diplomat. What the dossier on Commander Sarah Reeves had failed to include, because humanity had spent real money keeping it out, was the decade before the clipboard. 2 wars, orbital marines, a service record with more redactions than sentences. The State Department hadn't recruited her despite her past. They'd recruited her because someone upstairs finally understood what negotiation with empires actually required. The first guard reached for her shoulder. She wasn't there. She was inside his reach, and the ceremonial war table, obsidian, sacred, 11 centuries old, met his knees at velocity. The second swung a blade. She answered with the thermos, steel ringing off his jaw like a church bell with opinions. The third she introduced to the clipboard, edge first, and the fourth to the floor, using the third as a scenic route. "I pity the fool," she said to the fifth, deadpan, and dropped him with an elbow that predated diplomacy by 100,000 years. The sixth guard, a veteran of 9 campaigns, looked at his fallen brothers, looked at the small purpling woman breathing steadily amid the wreckage of sacred furniture, and did something No had done in living memory. He set down his blade and knelt, not in surrender to humanity, his descendants would insist, but in the reasonable religious conviction that he was in the presence of some kind of demon. "Smart," Sarah told him, and meant it. "Stay down, keep your friends breathing, and we'll call it cultural exchange." Across the galaxy, the fireworks were spreading. On the Concord, 11 elder ambassadors convened an emergency session that consisted mostly of shouting the phrase, "Page what?" in 11 languages, followed by the sound of 9,000 pages being read, aloud for the first time, at genuine panic speed. 3 other empires quietly discovered their own subclauses that evening. The Dominion found one triggered by tariff fraud. The Combine found one triggered by lying at dinner. The Galactic news feeds ran it all like a sports network. Standings, highlights, a lower third ticker reading Vraxin Empire, FORFEITS PROTCTIONS. ANALYSTS blame the face thing. And on 12 worlds, in the mines and the dark, chained laborers gathered around contraband receivers and listened to a translated broadcast of a human woman saying he touched the face. And though none of them knew the rules, all of them understood the score. On Prime, the rioting started as singing. The overseers, watching human cruisers bloom in their sky, discovered urgent business elsewhere. Sarah felt none of it and all of it. 14 months ago, a child's voice had asked if the humans were real. She stepped over an unconscious honor guard, retrieved her gum from where the fight had relocated it, floor rules applied. She left it and faced Hal across his ruined table. "It's done, Marshal. Your fleet's checkmated, your boarding decks are singing along to the chorus by now, and your empire's lawyers just discovered feelings. Stand down. Nobody else has to get hurt today, and frankly my face hurts and I want a milkshake." And for one fragile second, she watched him actually consider it. Watched 12,000 years of certainty stand at a crossroads it had never known existed. The possibility that losing could be survived, that a treaty could be something other than a leash. His fist unclenched. Something almost like reason moved behind the dead star eyes. Then his gaze rose to the banners of 100 conquered worlds, all of them watching him, and the crossroads closed. "No," Hal said quietly, "the Unbroken does not kneel to fine print." He turned to the command dais and drove his fist through a crystal seal that had never been broken in the ship's 1100-year history. Beneath it, a control the color of arterial blood. He pressed it with something horribly like peace. The inevitable Dominion began to speak in a new voice, a low harmonic that rose through the deck plates, through boots and teeth and bone, as every fusion core aboard began the slow ceremonial hymn of overload. Fail deadly doctrine, written by ancestors who preferred erasure to embarrassment. If the ship could not win, the ship would become a star and take the human fleet, the evidence, and the precedent with it. Core ascension initiated, the ship announced, in tones of liturgical satisfaction. Glory in 9 minutes. The bridge crew froze. Even the kneeling guard looked up. The legal officer made a sound that no larynx was designed for, and which translated loosely as objection. Sarah closed her eyes for exactly one slow breath. Somewhere below, faint through the deck, she could hear her marine speakers still playing, the guitar climbing, oblivious, toward a chorus 9 minutes away that some of them might not hear. "See," she said, opening her eyes, "this is why we can't have nice galaxies." Hal stood silhouetted against the viewport and his burning pride, cape settling around him like a funeral flag. "You wanted the unbroken, human. Come finish your negotiation." Sarah spat blood, popped a fresh stick of spearmint, and started walking toward him, because Rule 3 existed, because a child had asked if the humans were real, and because somewhere in 9,000 pages of fine print, nobody had ever included a clause for this. 8 minutes 50 seconds. Somewhere the guitar kept climbing. They met in the space where the war table used to be. Hal shed his cape, dried blood red pooling on obsidian like an omen retiring, and drew a blade older than most human nations. Around them, the inevitable Dominion hummed its rising death hymn, and the countdown burned in the air above the dais. 8 minutes, 11 seconds. The bridge crew formed a silent ring, not to help their marshal, to witness. It was the most thing imaginable, and Sarah found she almost respected it. "No soldiers," Hal said. "No fine print, just the truth of strength. You people really need a second hobby." Sarah circled left, hands loose, weight low, every trace of the clipboard-carrying diplomat evaporated. "Book club, pottery, anything." He came at her like weather. The blade sang a note that predated music, and the deck itself seemed to flinch. The first strike would have opened a bulkhead. She wasn't in it. The second sheared a console in half. She was under it, inside his guard, hammering 2 knuckle strikes into the joint seam of his armor that made him grunt for the first time in 9 campaigns. He backhanded, she rode it, rolling with the force the way she'd rolled with the slap, and came up spitting fresh blood and grinning through it. "You fight without honor," he snarled. "I fight without dying. It's a whole philosophy." She ducked the blade, stripped a ceremonial banner from its pole, and snapped it across his eyes. While 12,000 years of conquest was blinded by its own flag, she kicked out his knee. He crashed to the deck, rose, crashed again as she took the other knee. It went on like that, the war god swinging annihilation, the small bruised woman answering with geometry, patience, and furniture, until Hal knelt in the ruins of his own bridge, blade skittering away, one eye swollen shut, and heard, for the first time, the sound of his crew not cheering for him. 7 minutes 2 seconds. "Finish it," he rasped. "That is your third rule, is it not? Read them aloud, always finish it, so finish." Sarah stood over him, breathing hard, one eye purple-black, knuckles split. And then she did the thing she could have done to Hal the Unbroken. She sat down, cross-legged on his bridge, in front of his crew, and unwrapped a stick of gum. 2 years, she said conversationally. "That's how long I studied you, Marshal. Your campaigns, your saga scrolls, your psych profile, which, fun fact, your own empire keeps on all its marshals, and which one of your own clerks sold us for the price of a mid-tier fishing boat." She popped the gum. "I learned what you eat before battle. I learned you rehearse your victory speeches. And I learned the one insult in high that no marshal in your line has ever once in recorded history answered with words." The bridge had gone still in a new way. Even the death hymn seemed to lean in. "Carrion eater," she said softly. Your grandfather killed a fleet lord over that word. Your mother burned a moon over it. You didn't lose your temper on this bridge, Hal. I sent the invitation 14 months ago, and I spent every day since making sure that when you hit me, you do it in ritual context in front of witnesses with your gauntlet on. She leaned forward. The slap was never your weapon. It was my signature. I just needed your hand to hold the pen. She watched it break him, not the knee, not the eye, but this. The dawning, tectonic comprehension that the weak little species had outthought his empire with a clipboard, a chewing gum habit, and 2 years of homework. That strength had never been the only law, that he had been from the moment she boarded the second predator on his own bridge. Then I have already lost, he said. The ascension completes. At least the ending is mine. See, that's the thing. Sarah stood, wincing, one hand pressed to her ribs. 6 minutes, 40 seconds. I read your fine print, too. She raised her voice and switched once more into high, ritual grammar, but not the challenge tense this time. An older form. A tense so archaic that half the bridge crew needed their translators, and the translators needed a moment. I, Sarah Reeves, blood-marked and standing, invoke the mercy of the victor under the Third Epic Codex, witnessed by banner and crew. Your ship for your people, your surrender for their lives. Answer unbroken, as your ancestors wrote you must. Made the objection sound again, then stopped, scrolled, his talons trembled. War-Marshal, the form is valid. The Codex predates the Ascension doctrine. A valid mercy invocation legally supersedes the death hymn. If you accept, the ship must stand down. It is our law. It is our oldest law. You read our codex, Hal said. It came out hollow, wondering, almost young. Every page. Yours was only 6,000, honestly. Better prose than ours. She crouched to his eye level, and for the first time all day, the wit fell away entirely, and what remained underneath was the thing that had carried her through 2 wars and 14 months of hearings. Something that wasn't softness and wasn't cruelty and was infinitely more dangerous than either. Here's the reckoning, Marshal. Not the fleet outside, not the fine print. This, I'm offering your crew their lives in your own sacred grammar in front of your ancestors' banners, and if you refuse, they'll die knowing a carrion eater's death was chosen for them by pride. Or you accept, and every on this ship goes home, and history writes that the Unbroken was strong enough to bend. She held out her split-knuckled hand. Rule 3 says finish it. It's never once said kill. 5 minutes. 4. The hymn climbed toward its terrible final key. 40 crew members watched their marshal stare at a small, open human hand as if it were the strangest weapon ever pointed at him, which, in fairness, it was. Hal looked up at the banners of 100 conquered worlds, and then past them at his crew, the young censor officer, the trembling legal officer, the guard still kneeling by the door, and something in his stone face finally, audibly, cracked. The Unbroken, he said, accepts the mercy of the victor. His hand swallowed hers. The words of ratification ground out of him in the old tense, and the moment the final syllable landed, the inevitable dominion, bound by law older than its own doctrine, swallowed its death hymn mid-note. The countdown froze, flickered, and released. 3 seconds left on the display. The bridge lights steadied. Somewhere far below, the Marine's guitar reached its chorus at last, muffled and triumphant through 6 decks of stunned warship. Sarah stared at the frozen display, then laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, slightly unhinged, the laugh of a woman whose entire disapproved. 3 seconds, poetic. I'd have preferred 5. The aftermath took a month and felt like a carnival crossed with a very long deposition. They came up out of the mines blinking into daylight, 12 billion of them, and the first human aid ship to land on Prime was greeted by a banner, hand-painted in careful traded English. The humans were real. Sarah kept the photo on her office wall, framed in cheap plastic, crooked, perfect. She did not tell anyone why she looked at it every morning, and nobody who mattered needed to ask. The Empire signed the new accords in a ceremony notable chiefly for its pace. Every clause read aloud twice by 3 separate lawyers, while a newly promoted, deeply traumatized, followed along with a talon under each line like a child learning to read. When he reached the signature page, he looked up at the human delegation and asked, with genuine dread, "Is there anything else in here?" "Wouldn't you like to know?" said Sarah, icing her cheek with a cold soda can and aged visibly. Hal, stripped of fleet command, sentenced by his own people to the one punishment worse than execution, was appointed ambassador to Earth. He arrived expecting mockery and found, to his geological bewilderment, barbecue. Admiral asked Sarah, at the reception, whether Rule 2 had been worth a fractured cheekbone. "Cheaper than a war," Sarah said, "and I've been hit harder at Thanksgiving. My aunt fights for the last dinner roll like it owes her money." Concord-wide, the reforms rolled out within the year. Every member species now received a mandatory briefing on human relations, 40 minutes long, summarized on its first slide in letters visible from orbit. "Do not slap." Beneath it, smaller, "Do not sign anything without reading it." Beneath that, smaller still, "Seriously." On a gray morning 11 months later, Sarah stood in a shuttle bay with a packed bag, a full thermos and new orders. A fresh empire on the rim, the sovereign Maw, charming name, had requested negotiations, and had specifically, arrogantly, demanded humanity send its best. Her new aide, a nervous kid named Tors with a diplomat's degree and a Marine's haircut, jogged to keep up. "Ma'am, they say the Maw don't take hostages. They say their champions have never been beaten. They say." "They always say." Sarah stepped onto the ramp and popped her gum, a small green gunshot in the echoing bay. "Then at least tell me the rules, the real ones," Tor's voice cracked. "Rule 1, what's Rule 1? Sarah paused in the shuttle doorway, backlit, one eye still faintly gold-bruised, and smiled the smile that an empire 12,000 years old had learned to fear in a single afternoon. "Rule 1, never throw the first punch." The engines began to sing. "But sweetheart, nobody ever asks about Rule 3. The doors sighed shut. The shuttle rose. And somewhere out on the galactic rim, an empire that had never been beaten went right on believing it, for exactly as long as it would take one small woman with a thermos to arrive and be nice. Until it was time not to be.